This is the first of 5 videos exploring the most controversial sitcoms on television in the UK. We will have a look at why people considered these shows so controversial. As this is the first in this series of videos, these are some of the least offensive offerings. They all broadcast just 6 or 7 episodes, although one had apparently been made as a 13 episode series. The Virgin Fellas was written and directed by David Croft and made for BBC One by George Rocky Productions. It was filmed in Australia primarily for broadcast in the UK, but also shown in Australia under the title Birds in the Bush. It starred Hugh Lloyd and Australian character actor Ron Fraser. Fraser had worked in the theatre and films in the UK in the 1950s. So far, so good. Lloyd inherits an Australian property run by 7 fellas, except these are not fellas in our normal understanding of the word. They were 7 beautiful but naive young women. Lloyd and Fraser attempt to try and teach the impressionable young women the ways of the world. One of the fellas was 1964 Miss United Kingdom and 1964 Miss World Anne Sydney. She went on to have a successful career in television, film, musical theatre and pantomime. The series was produced on 16mm film because British television networks were transmitting in colour by 1972, but Australian television network Channel 7's studio was not yet equipped for colour. So each broadcaster could use the telecine process to convert the film for their local systems. It was broadcast in May to June 1972 in Australia and July to August 1972 in the UK. The programme was not a success on Australian television. It was suggested that it's because this carry-on style of humour was not part of the Australian audience's comedy history and was particularly offensive in the second wave of feminism. The BBC clearly realised it was not a success. The ratings were not good. In the UK, only the first 7 of the 13 episodes made were screened. The Radio Times stated it was a 7-part series, so it's possible the final 6 episodes were due to be aired as a second series, but were never shown. It was not just the fact that the series focused attention on the attractiveness of 7 pretty young women, but they all wore skimpy smocks and had names like Lolita, Tuesday and Buster. The show was filled with carry-on style innuendo. British critics attacked the show for featuring sniggering sex jokes. One reviewer wrote, "It was unbelievably sexist even by the standards of the era that gave us The Benny Hill Show and Casanova 73. Interviewed in 1981, cast member Katie Shield, who played one of the girls, said, "I'm still trying to live that down because a lot of people hated it. We just run around saying these amazing things. I used to watch it for the scenery." It was surprising that Lloyd had accepted the part, given that he turned down other work which he considered to be too blue, and that he regularly appeared on radio and television to discuss his views on Christianity. As was common with early television series, the BBC probably reused the videotapes from the original 16mm film. Neither the BBC nor BFI appear to have the series on film either. In any event, it's unlikely the BBC would ever show it again. BBC sources say they do not think they have the rights to the series anyway. All 13 episodes are archived at the National Film and Sound Archive Australia on 16mm film. In 2021, episodes 1, 8 and 13 were located in the UK, but as medium to low quality monochrome and appear to be transfers from film to VHS to DVD and have the Australian titles. About 5 minutes of one of these recordings was shown at the BFI South Banks Missing Believed Wiped event on the 27th of November 2021. This was the first time any of this sitcom had been shown in public since 1975. There was no commercial VHS or DVD release. After the death of his writing partner Harry Driver, Vince Powell became a comedy consultant to Thames Television. The Whackers was the first sitcom he wrote as a solo writer. Philip Jones, head of light entertainment at Thames, valued Powell's expertise and decided to go ahead with a series of The Whackers without bothering with a pilot. That would turn out to be a mistake. Billy Clarkson, played by Ken Jones, is released from prison and returns to settle back into his home in Liverpool after being away for 2 years. He may have been chosen for the role, having recently appeared in series 1 and 2 of the BBC sitcom Porridge as Bernard Horrible Ives. Billy is the head of a divided family. Half of them are Catholics and half of them are Protestants. Half of them support Liverpool Football Club, the other half support Everton Football Club. So that's the background conflict element sorted. In his autobiography, From Rags to Gags, Vince Powell had called the show a forerunner to Bread. There was even an equivalent grandad figure in the shape of Joe Gladwin's incontinent Joe Farrell. The show featured at number 7 in the Watch Mojo UK list of top 10 British comedies they'd never get away with now. Not surprisingly, the Liverpool Echo had a lot to say about the show. A review of the first episode by a Liverpool Echo journalist on March the 20th, 1975 said the people of Liverpool have given television's latest Scouse family a resounding raspberry. Looking back at it in 2022, Echo reporter Lee Grimsditch said, after the first episode was broadcast, people from Liverpool wrote into the Echo to express their disgust. Readers' comments included, "We turned it off," "too much vulgarity," and 40 years out of date. Mary Malone in the Daily Mirror said, "If what you are after is a load of grubby, scurrilous rubbish, you can't go wrong with the whackers. If you flushed all the lavatory jokes out of this first episode, it would have vanished down the plug hole." Sean Usher in the Daily Mail commented, "This is the crudest, coarsest and in some way the most disgraceful specimen of its kind." Mary Duffy in the Express said, "A show mistakenly billed as a comedy. We were virtually stretched on the rack of vulgarity." When the show was aired in Australia, it fared just as badly. John Pinkney in The Age newspaper said the show was a half-hour lavatory joke that's hardly worth the toilet paper on which it seems to have been written. As a result of the negative press reaction, Philip Jones asked the director Anthony Parker to edit out the offensive remarks from each episode, but he and Powell opposed the idea, so they asked Jeremy Isaacs, controller of programming at Thames, to intervene. In a judgment worthy of King Solomon, he asked them to nominate the worst offending episode. That one would not be aired, but the other ones could go out unedited. So episode 7 was never broadcast. All 7 episodes still exist in the archives, but the series was never broadcast again. The Whackers has been assigned to relative obscurity. Network released a DVD of all 7 episodes in 2019. A Small Problem was a BBC sitcom aired from January to March 1987 that was intended to be a satire on prejudice, and especially racial prejudice. It was supposed to mirror apartheid in South Africa. The show was set in a Britain with a form of apartheid based on people's height. Anybody below 5 foot 1 inch tall was forced to live in tower block ghettos south of the River Thames. However, unsurprisingly, many people missed the point of the satire altogether and thought the series was picking on short people and getting easy laughs at their expense. The writers, Mike Walling and Tony Milan, were better known as actors with significant parts in Brushstrokes and Citizen Smith respectively. A Small Problem was their first full series commission. There were claims that the BBC was flooded with complaints, but this is not substantiated in any reference I found. It is true they received complaints, largely because of the use of terms like midget and dwarf. The fact that people thought it wasn't particularly funny didn't help much either. A short stature is not one that tends to be celebrated in our society. There's an inclination to ridicule those who don't conform to specific measurements and an unfair labelling of them as weak and ineffective. It's all part of humanity's knee-jerk reaction to anything that's slightly different. Tony explained that even language discriminates. He said one talks of belittling things, looking up to people, being made to feel small. So the notion of small people as the subject of prejudice became clear. The thing is, Mike and Tony anticipated some of the backlash. They even said so in a Radio Times article, except that it was not published until after the second episode had aired. Had the article been published earlier, some of the backlash might have been mitigated. However, it seems the Radio Times article was something of a damage control strategy, as it referred to the live BBC One feedback programme Open Air, shown the morning after the second episode. The programme was hosted at the BBC Pebble Mill Studios in Birmingham. Mike and Tony appeared via video link from BBC Television Centre. They were invited on the show to defend themselves because the BBC said they'd had a lot of complaints. In an interview in 2021, Tony said, "We were introduced on air to a young couple sitting in the Southampton studio. When the picture of them popped up on the monitor, we knew we couldn't come out of this interview well. The girl was less than 4 foot and sitting on a low sofa, her feet didn't touch the ground. Her boyfriend was a lanky 6 foot 3 inches and had his knees tucked under his chin." He said nothing. She was the aggrieved party. Tony said, "There were stories in the media of shorter people complaining bitterly about the show, but apart from the open air episode, we never encountered anything or were reliably informed about any complaints. I think they were just that, stories in the media." Even before the show was aired, the Daily Mirror ran a piece in its television listing saying, "Little people are set to make a big fuss tonight after watching a TV comedy that gets laughs out of people of restricted growth." As it had appeared on the morning before the first episode was transmitted, it was more clairvoyance than journalism. Viewer Michael Howie said that the change in method of the measurement in the show demonstrated an arbitrary decision could alter the line, like being a bit gay, or a bit black, or a bit Muslim. Didn't quite make sense. I'm sure the idea was to make the viewer feel like they could easily be discriminated against, but it didn't quite make it. A contributor on the Cooked and Bombed forum wrote, "It's meant to be a metaphor for apartheid, yet the way the small people are treated is played for laughs, and so the comparison is pretty offensive one given the misery and deaths that took place in Africa, but added much of the satire of the media works effectively." Kevin Lyons of the Encyclopedia of Fantastic Film and Television said, "The already thin joke is stretched to the limit by the end of the first episode, and it very quickly becomes clear that there simply wasn't enough material here to run a whole series." Kevin pointed out that viewers with long memories may have wondered where they'd seen all this before. The answer was in an episode of The Goodies in 1975, known as Apartheid, or A South African Adventure. In the episode, the Goodies accidentally end apartheid in South Africa, leaving space for the creation of apartheid, leading to the same situation seen in A Small Problem. The transmission time for all 6 episodes of A Small Problem was 9 p.m. Mondays on BBC Two. There was to be no second series of A Small Problem. It was not repeated and does not appear to have been released on DVD. Those were the 3 least controversial sitcoms on my list. Join me for the next video for 3 even more controversial shows. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give us a like and subscribe for more about television sitcoms. Thanks for watching.